Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Eduyot. We are up to Parakeh Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilui Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov, Chana ben Miriam, Sason ben Ryan, Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen, and Avdil ben Chaim lechaim, v'derefua shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betok Shah Cholei Israel, and Achlama Mera Binyamin Otzion Chai ben Dvorah. Having completed the listing of Bet Shammai's lenient decisions, the Mishnah returns to the previous topic of the tractate, the testimonies of various Tanaim. Akavia ben Mahalalel ha'id arba dvarim. Akavia ben Mahalalel testified about 4 matters which were disputed by the other sages of his time. Akavia ben Mahalalel was considered one of the greatest sages of the early Tanaic period, as the Mishnah will soon make clear. Amrulo, the sages said to him, Akavia chazor becha ba'arba dvarim she'ita omer. Akavia, reverse your opinion about the 4 matters that you used to say in the name of earlier sages. V'nascha av bedin le'Yisrael, and we will appoint you the av bedin, the chief of the court for the Jewish people. The av bedin was second to the Nasi in the leadership of the great Sanhedrin of 71 judges, as the Rambam writes in the Eduyot Sanhedrin, chapter 1, Alachat 3. The sages maintained that since Akavia held the minority opinion, he was required to accept the ruling of the majority. Akavia maintained that since these were not his own opinions but traditions he had received from many sages of the previous generation, he was within his rights to maintain his position. This will be explained further in the next Mishnah. Amar le, and Akavia replied to them, Mutav li likreh shotek kol yamai. It is preferable for me to be called a fool all the days of my life, velo le'asot shah achad rasha lefnei hamakom, and not become a wicked person for even one moment before God, by rejecting the tradition I received from the previous generation. Shelo yu omrim b'shvin sirara chazar bo. And even if I did reverse my opinion, I would not accept the position of Av Bedin, so that people should not say that Akavia reversed his opinions for the sake of obtaining a position of authority. The first 2 testimonies of Akavia are presented together. The first testimony concerns one of the signs of confirmed sarat. Sarat is a certain type of skin affliction whose symptoms are described in Vayikra chapter 13. Sarat is characterized by certain types of discoloration of the skin known as a nega, usually in the form of a white patch. A white patch by itself is not a conclusive sign of sarat. To confirm a nega as sarat, additional signs are needed. One of these is the appearance of 2 white hairs inside the nega. White hairs confirm a nega as sarat only if they become white after the nega appears. If they are white to begin with, they are not a sign of sarat. A person with a nega without white hairs or other definite signs, or whose hairs had turned white before the nega formed, is confined for 7 days to see if any of the definite signs of sarat will develop, as it says in Negaim chapter 4, Mishnah 11. And the legal differences between a confirmed mitzvah and a confined mitzvah are listed in Megillah chapter 1, Mishnah 7. The second one addresses which discharges from a woman are considered nida blood. Huaya mitames sara pikuda. He, Akavia, would declare a white discoloration of the skin tameh as sarat based on a white hair that was left on deposit from a previous occurrence of sarat, meaning if hair inside a nega, discolored patch of skin, turned white, and the nega then disappeared for a time and returned while those white hairs were still present, Akavia ruled that the new nega was considered confirmed sarat based on the white hairs that were left over from the previous nega. Akavia held that since the hairs turned white as a result of the first nega's appearance, making them a sign of confirmed sarat, they retained that status even if that nega disappeared and a new nega appeared in its place. It is as if these white hairs were left on deposit to be a sign of definite sarat when the nega reappears. There is therefore no need to confine the person, rather he is declared tameh immediately. The dam yarok, and Akavia also ruled that a discharge of yellow blood is nida blood and therefore tameh. The yellow referenced here is a deep yellow color similar to that of an egg yolk or to a reddish, coppery shade of gold. Not all discharges from a woman make her nida. There are 5 colors of blood that are considered tameh, 4 specific shades of red and black. This is in Nida chapter 2, Mishnah 6. Black is considered tameh because it is presumed to have been red blood that deteriorated and turned black. According to Akavia, the shade of yellow mentioned here is also presumed to have been blood that was originally a shade of red, which then faded to yellow when it was discharged from the uterus. Today, we no longer have the expertise to discern between the tameh and tahor shades of red, and we therefore consider any discharge that tends towards redness to be tameh, as the 2 writes in Yerodea, chapter 184. The sages, however, declare both of these tahor. They do not regard white hair left on deposit as a sign of confirmed tzarad, because the nega that caused them to turn white has since disappeared. Since these white hairs preceded the current nega, they are not a sign of confirmed tzarad. Of course, the person will still need to be confined for 7 days, like any other person whose white hair preceded his nega. The sages also maintain that yellow blood is ta'ol, since it is not one of the red shades listed in Nida, chapter 2, Mishnah 6. They are not concerned that the blood was initially a red color that has since faded to yellow. The dispute between Akavia and the sages concerning white hairs appears in Negaim, chapter 5, Mishnah 3, and the one about yellow blood appears in Nida, chapter 2, Mishnah 6. The third dispute concerns hair that fell off a Bechor animal that became blemished. A Bechor animal is a firstborn male calf, lamb, or kid. A Bechor is considered holy, and it is given as a gift to a Kohen, who offers it in the temple and eats its meat, as says in Bamidbar, chapter 18, verses 17 and 18. If it is blemished and therefore unfit to be used as an offering, it must still be given as a gift to a Kohen. He may then slaughter it and eat its meat anywhere once its blemish was verified by an expert, as says in Dvarim, chapter 15, verses 21 and 22. Although the blemished Bechor belongs to the Kohen, he is biblically forbidden to shear its wool or work with the animal, as says in Dvarim, chapter 15, verse 19, and Chulin, chapter 10, Mishnah 2. The only thing he may do with it is slaughter it and eat its meat. If the Bechor is sheared while it is alive, or even if its wool falls out on its own, the wool is rabbinically forbidden for benefit. However, when a blemished Bechor is slaughtered, its wool is permitted. Akavia would also permit benefiting from hair that fell off a blemished Bechor while the animal was alive, which the Kohen who owned it had placed in a cubbyhole for safekeeping, and he then slaughtered the animal. Akavia maintains that just as the slaughter of a blemished Bechor permits the wool that is still attached to it, so too it permits the wool that had previously fallen off. However, the sages prohibit having benefit from the hair that fell out during the Bechor's lifetime. This was decreed to prevent Kohanim from keeping a blemished Bechor alive, in order to collect a large amount of wool from it before slaughtering it. The longer a blemished Bechor remains alive, the greater the likelihood that someone will shear the animal or put it to work in violation of Torah law. The sages agree with the caveat that the wool that falls off is biblically permitted. However, they maintain that there was a decree to prohibit its use so that Kohanim would not be tempted to keep it around to gather wool. This dispute appears in Bechorot, chapter 3, Mishnah 4. The fourth dispute centers on whether certain women who are suspected of being unfaithful to their husbands are excluded from undergoing the test of drinking the bitter waters in the temple. A woman who is alone with a certain man after her husband warned her never to be alone with that man is suspected of having committed adultery. She is known as a sotah. If she insists she is innocent and wishes to remain married to her husband, the Torah states in Bamidbar chapter 5 verses 11 through 28 that her husband should bring her to the temple to undergo a test to determine if she is innocent. As part of this test, a Kohen writes on a parchment a number of verses from the biblical passage about the sotah and her fate, dissolves them in water together with the bitter herb, and gives the water to the woman to drink. If she actually committed adultery, she dies a horrible death, while if she is indeed innocent, nothing happens to her, and she may be reunited with her husband. The mixture given to the woman to drink is known as the Maim Hamarim, the bitter waters. Huaya Omer, Akavia used to say, En mashkin lo et hagioret velo et shivcha mishucheret. We do not give the bitter waters to drink either to a convert who secluded herself with a man in violation of her husband's warning, or to a freed Canaanite slave woman who was married and did this. A female Canaanite slave immerses in a mikveh when she is bought by a Jewish master and thereby acquires a semi-Jewish status. When she is freed, she immerses again and becomes a full convert, as the Rambam writes in Nechot Yisur Biyah, chapter 13, Halakha 11 and 12. If she then marries a Jewish man and becomes suspected of adultery, she is not subject to the test of the bitter waters, according to Akavia. He learns this from the text of the oath that the Kohen imposes upon a sotah before she is given the water to drink. In Bamidbar, chapter 5, verse 21, may Hashem make you a curse and an oath among your people. The expression your people, in Akavia's opinion, limits the laws of sotah water to a woman of Jewish birth and excludes a convert who left her nation of birth to join the Jewish people. Since her innocence cannot be established in drinking the bitter waters, she remains forbidden to her husband and must be divorced. But the sages say we do give them the bitter waters to drink. The sages contend that the phrase among her people does not refer to her nation of birth, but to her current nation. Therefore, even a convert or freed Canaanite slave woman is eligible to drink the bitter waters. The Mishnah reports a case that supports the sages' position and the exchange about it that followed between Akavia and the sages. Amrulo, the sages said to Akavia, Maseh bechalkemit shivcha mishucheret she'ayta b'Yerushalayim, an incident involving a certain chalkemit. Either this was the woman's name or else she came from the town of Kharkom, a freed Canaanite slave woman, and this incident took place in Jerusalem. Vishkua Shmaya v'Avtalion, and Shmaya and Avtalion had her drink the bitter waters. Shmaya and Avtalion occupied the offices of Nasi and Avbedin in the generation before Hillel and Shammai. They had already passed away when the exchange between Akavia and the sages took place. This proves that we do give sota water to a freed Canaanite slave or to a convert. Amar lehem, Akavia replied to them, this is not proof. Dugmai shkua, they gave her sota water to drink only because they were just like her, being converts themselves. Although she should actually have been exempt from drinking, as I maintain, still they understood the law to mean that she could drink because they were predisposed toward treating converts exactly the same as born Jews. Akavia argued that Shmaya and Avtalion allowed personal considerations to influence their judgment. Since Shmaya and Avtalion were converts and wanted converts to be treated the same as born Jews, they explained the verse to mean that the bitter waters may be given to a convert the same as to a born Jew. Had they been completely objective, Akavia argued, they would have ruled as I did that converts are exempt from drinking. Viniduhu, the sages viewed this response as an insult to Shmaya and Avtalion, and they therefore placed Akavia under ban for saying this. One of the punishments available to a bedin is the nidui ban. When the court pronounces a nidui ban upon an offender, people are required to stay 4 amot, 6 to 8 feet away from him. They may not eat and drink with him, and they may not count him toward a minyan. The offender is obligated to conduct himself in most matters like a mourner. He may not take a haircut or launder his clothes throughout the term of the nidui, which typically lasts for 30 days, as the Rambam writes in Nechot Talmud Torah, chapter 7, Nechot 2-5. The rabbis resorted to the extreme measure of nidui because they considered Akavia's choice of words. They gave her to drink because they were just like her, extremely offensive. Had Shmaya and Avtalion still been alive, they would have been within their rights to impose a nidui ban on him because of this insult to their honor. Since these two great leaders had already passed away, the Bedin of that day was obligated to excommunicate Akavia, whose action insulting sages after their death was one of the 24 sins for which a Bedin must place someone in Eduyot. It says in Barachot, page 19a. Had the Bedin not been obligated to excommunicate him, they would not have done so, since Akavia ben Netanel was such a great man. Umed ben Eduyot, Akavia died in his state of having been banned. V'saklu bedin et arono, and the court stoned his coffin. They did not literally stone the coffin, rather they placed a large stone on the coffin as a symbol of stoning. The purpose of this symbolic stoning is to shame the person for dishonoring the sages by failing to seek their pardon and the release from the nidui. Atana disputes this version of the story. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Chas v'shalom she'Akavia nitnada. Heaven forbid that anyone should say that Akavia was placed under a ban. Shena zara nin'elet bifnei kol adam Yisrael. For on Erev Pesach, the doors of the temple courtyard did not close on anyone in the entire Jewish people. B'chokhmah u'virat chet ke'Akavia ben Netanel, who was as great in wisdom and in fear of sin as Akavia ben Netanel. On Erev Pesach, when the entire nation came to the temple to slaughter the Pesach offering, the people were divided into 3 groups. The first group entered the temple court until it was filled, and then the gates of the court were closed, and their offerings were brought. When they finished bringing their offerings, the first group left the court, and the second group entered, filled the court, and brought their offerings. When the second group left, the third group entered to bring their offerings. Rabbi Yehuda is stating that on Erev Pesach, when the gates of the court closed in the entire nation, group after group, there was no one in the court who could equal Akavia in wisdom and fear of sin. In short, Rabbi Yehuda asserted that Akavia was the wisest in the nation and had the greatest fear of sin. Meaning there was no one in his generation that was his equal. It's therefore inconceivable that someone possessing his level of Torah scholarship and piety could ever have spoken disrespectfully about Shmaya and Avtalion. Given Akavia's wisdom, piety, and humility, it's inconceivable that he accused Shmaya and Avtalion of wrongly allowing the Sotah to drink because they were just like her, as the Tanna Kama claims. Rather, Akavia actually claimed that Shmaya and Avtalion permitted giving her an imitation drink to frighten her into confessing, but they agreed with him that she was not allowed to drink real bitter water since she was a convert. This claim was not an insult and therefore did not warrant nidui. Vet mi nidu, rather, who was it that they placed under ban? Elazar ben Chanoch. It was Elazar ben Chanoch, shepikpek b'tarot yadayim, who slighted the rabbi's requirement of purifying the hands. The rabbis decreed that in certain instances a person's hands become tameh even when the rest of his body remains tahor. Elazar ben Chanoch treated this decree lightly. In doing so, he was disrespectful to the rabbis who instituted the decree, and he was therefore placed in Nidui, U'shemet, and when he died, שלחו בית דין והניחו אבן על ארונו. The court sent its agents and they placed a stone on his coffin. מלמד שכל המתנדה עומד בנידויו. This teaches you that when anyone is placed under ban and dies in a state of banning, so clean at Arono, the court would stone his coffin. And that is in a Mishnah Vav. Again, in the previous Mishnah, Akavya refused to abandon the rulings of his 4 testimonies and adopt the rulings of the sages. Mishnah Zayin continues his discussion of Akavya's refusal. Bishat mitato amar livno, at the time of Akavya's death, he said to his son, Beni chazor becha ba'arba dvarim she'iti omer, my son, reverse your opinion regarding the 4 matters that he used to say, contrary to the opinion of the sages, meaning you should now accept the view of the sages in regard to white hair on deposit and yellow blood hair that fell from hair that fell from a bechor, and giving a convert the bitter waters to drink. Amar lo Akavya's son said to him, Velama lo chazarta becha, if that is the correct thing to do, why did you not reverse your opinion? Amar lo Akavya said to his son, my situation was different from yours. Ani shamati mipi merubim ve'em shamu mipi merubim. For I heard the tradition I quoted from the mouths of many sages of the previous generation, and those who disagreed with me heard the traditions they quoted from the mouths of sages of the previous generation. Ani amati bishmuati ve'em amdu bishmuatan. I therefore stood by the teaching I received, and they stood by the teaching they received. But you heard these opposing traditions, one from the mouth of an individual, myself, and one from the mouth of many sages of this generation. It is better for you to set aside the words of the individual and hold on to the words of the many. Although a tradition does not lose its authority just because it is preserved by only one individual, when there are conflicting traditions, it is preferable to follow the one being taught by many sages rather than by the one sage. Amar lo Akavya's son said to him, Abba, pekod alai lechaverecha, father, speak with your colleagues to accept me. Akavya's son feared that the sages of that generation might bear a grudge against him due to his father's long-standing dispute with them. He therefore asked his father to request of his colleagues that they accept him. Amar lo Akavya answered his son, Eni mepaked, I will not speak to them on your behalf. Amar lo, his son said to him, Shema avla matzatabi, have you perhaps found some flaw in me, which is why you're unwilling to speak for me? Amar lo lav, he said to him, no, there is no flaw, but there is also no reason for me to intercede. Your own deeds will bring you close to the sages if you are deserving, and your own deeds will distance you from them if you are not deserving. If your actions are virtuous, the sages will honor you without my intercession, and if, heaven forbid, your actions are improper, then I do not want the sages to honor you based on my say-so. And that is in Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.